This was about those that have good or bad reputations among major league players based on a survey of major league players. I want to go to Alec first on this because he had thoughts about it in our Discord server about the way that the results here and what it means and what it maybe doesn't mean about this is an organization that recently, of course, has gone through a lot of transition in all aspects, except for ownership. Ownership has been the constant through that, but last 2 years, a lot of other things operating differently internally. Just wanted to hear your thoughts, Alec, about seeing the Marlins coming up near the rear here in terms of negative feedback from players and nobody really nobody really going in their favor among the players that were surveyed.
Yeah, sure. And I'll also follow up with what you kind of responded, which I think is a very valid point. And my point was in reading a lot of this, I guess these numbers, the overarching caveat I'll provide is that I felt as if the Athletics coverage of the Marlins historically, and maybe some of the other, backrunner teams across MLB has been unnecessarily negative. And I feel as if in many ways, sometimes the team doesn't get its due. But that all being said, I felt maybe unsure of how representative these numbers perhaps are of the perception among players in the league. Like I kind of said on Discord that if you are asking a player, for example, in a very wealthy, historically successful organization, let's call it the Yankees, the Red Sox, I guess in more recent memory, the Dodgers, they're going to have perhaps less positive opinions of an organization that is perceptibly less wealthy, less successful, maybe historically has not been around for as long. And that applies not merely to the Marlins, but to the other 4 or 5 franchises that you see on the graph there. And I think there is something to be said for how a lot of the reputation and the perception that these teams have built being reinforced by some of the coverage that publications like The Athletic put out about teams on this graph. And that's to say, I am a subscriber of The Athletic. I find a lot of their coverage at least worth reading, worth digesting as a sports fan. But I think this is part of a wider trend, perhaps, of like irresponsible reporting on the matter of the teams. And now to go back to what you said, Eli, on the matter of if the reputation is truly undeserved, then you would expect Marlins alumni or previous players to come out in defense of the organization. We haven't necessarily heard that. I think that is telling in and of itself. But I will also say that, with the advent of, social media as being a very dominant way for, discourse surrounding the teams and maybe surrounding the sport writ large to, propagate, that you're going to have a lot of maybe any positive remarks drowned out by, just preconceived notions that are reinforced about these teams, especially the Marlins. So that all being said, are there things that are probably true about the Marlins? Yes. Are there things that sound like hearsay or maybe sound like the product of a game of telephone? Like, I don't know, players eating Subway on the road. I'm not sure how that's true. It's certainly possible. I'm not going to discount anything. Like you guys on this call would certainly know more about the goings on of the team on a daily basis than I would. But I don't know. There's some things that sound a little absurd and other things that sound, legitimately reasonable.
I am glad you mentioned how the national media perceives the Marlins, and they should. I mean, to be honest, they should. The Marlins have not been good at all in a very long time, aside from 2020, 2023. But I mentioned this in our group chat the other day because I'm listening to a show, and I'm just like, damn, like I know they're not great, but like you don't have to like harp on it, every chance you get to talk shit about the Marlins. And I do agree. I think the national media is unnecessarily negative towards the Marlins. I think there is a level of negativity that is fair, but then I think it's a little too much. And from personal experience, I've never seen Subway ever in the Marlins clubhouse. I've never seen it ever. I don't think Subway's terrible. It's not great, but yeah, you would assume a Major League Baseball team does not serve Subway to their players. Like Chick-fil-A, Chipotle, I think that's better. I've seen Chick-fil-A from personal experience. I know a lot of teams serve Chick-fil-A. So Subway, I don't know. But, I think the way that the Marlins are going to go about things is I'm hoping that that survey definitely sees them up than down there with, you know, the Rockies, White Sox, and the A's, rightfully so, at number 30. So I think that'll change within the next year or two, but we'll see.
And all I can, this is all very secondhand, but I do know that they have invested more manpower in their nutrition department specifically. It seems like that they recognize that is an area where, if not they were deficient before, then they feel like there's room for players to improve with the input of team staffers. That I at least that applies on home games when they have a particular setup where players are put in a position and highly pushed towards making dietary decisions that are efficient for their bodies in ways that I don't think they're cutting corners on that particular aspect of it. So I feel like that's something that's a little outdated. There's another comment in this article on the site from an anonymous player about how the team, it was like slamming them just because they're rebuilding in a way that I didn't feel was not, that wasn't really useful or fair, because a lot of other teams are. But the comment essentially said that the whole organization is 17-year-old players. They're all 7 years away. And for people, you just followed their trade deadline activity last year. A lot of the players they got were surprisingly close to the majors. So it doesn't really, there's no part of that really has any merit to it either. So that's one of those other things that is just a preconceived notion, I would think, about reading headlines and seeing a team that trades away a lot of major league players and doesn't really, and kind of tunes out from that point forward in terms of what's happening on the other end. But yeah, ultimately, if they just win more games, then that solves a lot of issues. And to this point, they're only winning about as many games as they did in 2024.
I know.
My question about this particular survey, and it doesn't really specify, but like, if you're not in the clubhouse and not a member of this organization, like, how do you know? Like how do you know what's going on? How do you know what they're eating? Like, maybe one of these players saw a Marlins player with Subway in the clubhouse one time, or multiple players with Subway one time, and then decided that the Marlins are feeding their players. So there's just so many areas of gray matter that could rely in this, that could exist in this survey. I don't think it's very well done, and it's no knock on the Athletic, but there's not enough information here for us to really trust that the players that they surveyed actually know what they're talking about. Other than, okay, maybe one of the guys is a friend of somebody on the Marlins and he said something about something. It's just so much gray area that could lead to like a he said, she said. It could lead to facts not actually being facts. I didn't like this. I thought it was just unnecessary badgering and clickbaity of the Athletic. I don't like this at all. I think that this was poor work by them. They usually do very good work, as Alec alluded to, but this is just knocking organizations for the sake of doing it without really having concrete information.
I completely agree with you, Carver, and backing off what Eli said and what David said in the chat, that players value winning above all. Here's the 10 lowest winning percentages in the past 10 years. The White Sox, the Marlins, the Rockies, the Tigers, the Pirates, the Angels, and the A's. I mean, that's seven of the top 10 all on this list. What does that tell you? I think that says that players that, like David said, they want to win above anything else. And that, you know, sometimes they just, for no reason, the bigger publications, not even just the Athletic, ESPN, Fox. I mean, I remember back in 2023, the Marlins were getting no national recognition, even when they had the, I think, third best record in the national lead at the All-Star break. But when it's time to, when it's time to shit on them, or all other teams that have not won a lot in the past 10 years, they're the first to do it. And I think, like both of you guys said, Athletic usually does great work, but I'm not a big fan of this. And I think the teams that, their winning percentage, or just them winning in general, has a lot to do with it.
And it's weird because I know the Athletic doesn't just do this poll. They do one about, there was one about managers, I want to say, like the ones you would want to play for, the ones you wouldn't want to play for. And somehow Gabe Kapler made it towards the one part that you just wouldn't want to play for a manager. Gabe Kapler has not managed since 2023, I want to say. It was the last time he was a manager. He was with the Giants. So how does he even make that list? And I know I was listening to the Foul Territory interview with the guy that does this. And he said, well, yeah, I mean, sometimes the players just don't want to answer. So they choose a random manager in their own division they don't like. It's like, all right, so that's not legit. So it's not a legit list. You're only going to, as Nate said, you're only going to vote for the teams, I guess, in this case, that are losing, are not good teams. And for what it's worth, the A's kind of, that one speaks for itself. They're in a minor league ballpark. Outside of that, like, yeah, it's weird. And like the Tigers, why are the Tigers on there? Like, they're one of the best teams in baseball. The Mariners were always decent team. Nationals are on the uprise. Like, I don't get it. Like the rest of them, you can make their case. Some of those, I don't know why they're on there, and it's borderline. Like one of them is like one person said bad, so I don't know. I don't think this was the greatest thing. They do this every year, so I'm looking forward to seeing how this looks like in a year from now. So, but yeah,
I guess the only thing that these teams may have in common is that a lot of them have had a lot of recent movement. So maybe they interviewed some of the players or a grouping of players that were on
like type of player to do this with.
That were on multiple teams or like on one. Like I don't know. There's just not enough information about their sampling. But just looking at a trend, I guess the only thing we can really say about all of these teams is that they've lost a lot of games recently, with the exception of maybe one or two of them. And the other thing is that they've had a lot of movement. So maybe, a guy gets traded and he's salty about it, or a guy gets cut and he's salty about it, gets signed for another team, and then has bad things to say about his previous team. Like, that's a guess. I don't know. We just don't know enough about the grouping of players that they interviewed to really make a call on this. And, it's interesting. Of all things about the Marlins, they call out Subway in the clubhouse. That's the most negative thing about the Marlins? I don't think so.